I am super excited to be here with you this evening. Thank you for joining me for the very first episode of HR in the Dark. This is, again, our inaugural episode where we're going to talk about, I've got a whole year of content planned for you guys, so I'm really, really excited about it. But tonight, we're really going to talk about things that have happened in 2017. We have now embarked on a brand new year. It is 2018, believe it or not. I still can't believe it. The holidays went by so quickly, but we have now embarked into a new year, and every time a new clock turns on the year, it's time to think about, at least from an HR perspective and other perspectives as well, how we can be better next year. So how are we going to be better in terms of human resources in 2018? And the truth of the matter is, quite honestly, HR is really kept in the dark about a lot of things. And there are quite a few reasons why HR is not brought into the fold as to things that are happening within companies that they're working in, quite honestly. I'm laughing to myself because I've been in so many environments in my 18, going on 19 years of HR, that there's so many things that I just didn't know were happening, and I found out just because I was, privy to the information after the fact, or they wanted to make sure that HR was kind of brought into the fold because they thought maybe there might be potentially an issue, but it was certainly after the fact. And so HR is really kept in the dark a lot of times. And so that's what the purpose of this podcast really is about, is to kind of give everybody some insight into why HR is kept in the dark, how HR can really be beneficial when HR is more proactive in the process as opposed to responsive. Now, certainly there are things that will occur that will require HR to be responsive in nature. But when HR partners with organizations in the beginning, when they have a seat at the table in the beginning, when they understand and are able to communicate with executives and senior leadership and kind of communicate that message and take those messages out to the workforce, it definitely is a much smoother scenario. Are there going to be times where things do not go well? Of course. I mean, we're talking about humans, which are the most imperfect things that are around, right? So definitely there's going to be times where things go awry. But I think that having a proactive approach to human resources is certainly more beneficial than always having a reactive response to human resources. There's a lot of things that are going to happen potentially in the long run that are more detrimental when HR is not aware. And so we want to shed some light and kind of expose the dark side of HR and things that happen in human resources that really should be brought to light. And then most importantly, the whole goal of this podcast really is to shed some light on how you as organizations, small businesses, can focus on how to develop your policies around what these things are, so that, the saying goes that you should learn from other people's mistakes, right? So we're going to be talking about some of the mistakes that have happened. We'll talk about things that are happening in the headlines currently, and how to prevent that from happening in your organization. So I'm super excited, if you can't tell already, to be here with you. Again, I'm Stephanie Lomax. I'm going to be your host here for the podcast for HR in the Dark. I'm president and CEO of HR Pro for You, which is an HR consulting firm that helps small businesses build their HR infrastructure effectively and legally and sound, so that as they continue to grow, they have a sound foundation to grow from. So let's go ahead and get jump started right into the podcast. Obviously, like I mentioned, we've embarked into a new year at this point. So it's 2018, and I don't know about anybody else, but even years have always been fantastic years for me personally and professionally. So I'm looking forward to what 2018 is going to bring from that respect. But let's take a quick look back over 2017 in terms of HR laws and HR happenings that have occurred in the workplaces. And we'll do a quick countdown. I've got 5 things that have happened in 2017 that you all should be aware of and be prepared for, even going into 2018, because while these things did occur in 2017, they've been occurring in prior years, and you can best believe that they're going to be occurring again in 2018. So why not get that jump start, right? So let's dive right in. So the first thing is kind of HR in the news. We've got discrimination around the LGBT community, which is relatively, I would say, in terms of from an HR perspective, it's new, having to have formal policies because laws obviously have been passed to protect sexual orientation, and companies need to be aware of what that means for them and what that means in terms of how they treat employees, how they hire employees, how they train employees, when they need to take employment action against these employees or any employees, but particularly protected class employees. What does that look like? What types of things do you need to have in place? There was a particular scenario, which oddly enough, didn't even involve anyone that was a part of the LGBT community. However, the person's boss felt like the individual, who happened to be a female, dressed like she was a member of the LGBT community. And for an entire year, continually made comments over the course of a year about how she dressed and how that made her look like she was a member of the LGBT community. This individual, once again, was not a member of the LGBT community, was a heterosexual individual, and used to camaraderie with her coworkers about how she dressed, the tattoos that she wore, and what that meant. Did it make her look like she was a member of the LGBT community? And even if it did, why would this particular supervisor feel that it was okay to have that conversation with her, particularly given the climate of the environment that we're in and how the LGBT community is a protected class in many respects. And so this individual actually took a leave of absence from their company and then decided to resign. When she decided to resign, she then filed a lawsuit stating constructive discharge. So now, for those of you that don't know what constructive discharge is, that essentially is creating such an environment that an employee feels that they need to quit as opposed to being fired. So you're basically forcing them to quit by making them feel completely uncomfortable in your work environment. And she won the case because there was continued evidence over the course of a 12-month period that this individual had been essentially bullied in the workplace. Now, bullying is not anything that's new in terms of 2017. That's not, it's obviously gotten more attention, but it isn't necessarily new. It's been kind of around for several years at this point. But as it relates to protected classes, it is relatively new. And so organizations that are encountering a variety of individuals from all types of backgrounds, sexual orientation, ethnicity, it's all under Title VII from 1964, Civil Rights Act of 1964. And so employers need to be aware of their conversations with their employees. They need to be aware of what they can and cannot say, what they can and cannot do as it relates to protected classes. That is still the law. It is going to likely remain the law. And so employers need to be well aware of what their policies in terms of the company policy state, as well as what it is that they can and cannot say and how they can and cannot treat employees. So that's our number 5 for the list. Number 4 is in regards to good old FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act. In this situation, there was a discharge by an employee who went out on family medical leave. And during her family medical leave, she took some time to go on vacation. And she posted some photos on her social media account of her vacation and her time off while she was on FMLA. And her company fired her as a result of that, stating that her posting of those photos was a violation of their social media policy. So we have 2 things kind of working here. Number 1, we have what is it that an employee can and cannot do and is expected or not expected to do when they're on family medical leave. That's 1. Number 2, brought up by the company, is their social media policy. What are employees allowed to post on social media, regardless of whether they're on family medical leave or not? What is the company's social media posting policy? Do they have one at all? Unfortunately for this organization, she sued them and she won, because in her discharge, they never even said anything about the fact that her job posts or her postings on social media were a violation of social media policy. They didn't say that at all. But yet that's what they stated to the court and in the hearing. And so she won that lawsuit, because they essentially were saying internally that they were terminating her for social media posting, but really they were basically ticked off because during her family medical leave, she went on vacation and posted pictures of her having this great time at Disney World or wherever she went while she was on family medical leave, and they felt some kind of way about that, and so they fired her as a result. Employers, you have got to be extremely careful about what it is that you communicate to employees, and you better know what your policy is, and you better make sure that policy is in line with what the law is, particularly around discharging employees that are out on FMLA. It is a very sensitive topic, a very sensitive act, and we just need to make sure that your policies are in order in the event. Does that mean that you cannot discharge somebody that's out on FMLA? Absolutely not. You most certainly can. Most importantly, if they're not able to return, if you're bound by FMLA and they're not able to return to work after their FMLA period is up, whether that's the 12 weeks that's granted by federal, or whether you are an employer in a state that has a more generous policy. For example, DC is 16 weeks. And so if they're not able to return to work after 16 weeks, you are no longer required to hold their job for them. If during the 16 weeks or the 12 weeks that they're out, they take a vacation and go somewhere, you better know whether or not discharging them is going to have some blowback on you, and what it is exactly that you say to them as a result of terminating them at that particular time. So just be aware. So that was number 4. Number 3, the Fair Labor Standards Act and this gig economy that we are currently in. Uber Eats, so it's part of Uber, but still Uber Eats, which I actually take advantage of quite frequently, and I love it. So Uber Eats and Lyft and all these other gig economies where people can kind of work on their own terms. They aren't deemed necessarily as employees, but there is definitely issue kind of around how much degree and control the organization or the employer actually has over what that person does. And so we need to just make sure that in any scenario, in terms of the Fair Labor Standards Act and how we have our employees classified, if they are classified as W-2 employees, they get a W-2 at the end of the year. You withhold the proper taxes and things like that from them, or whether they really are a 1099 and you give them a 1099 at the end of the year, they're able to work on their own someplace else. You do not dictate to them in terms of their hours. You do not dictate to them in terms of the equipment that they use, what they have access to. They're able to work for somebody else in the interim of working with you or during the course of working with you. We need to be really, really clear. The IRS has a 20-point test if you feel so deemed to go check it out, which you probably should be familiar with. But the 20-point test basically takes you through a step-by-step list of the things that you need to be aware of when determining what type of employee you have, whether it is what type of person you're hiring, should I say. Are they a W-2 employee or are they a 1099 contractor? It is it's pretty clear cut. Now, there are some gray areas. And again, at that point, you definitely want to engage with someone. If you don't have internal HR, you want to engage with either an HR consultant or an employment attorney to make sure that how you have your staff classified, whether they are W-2s or 1099s, making sure that that's accurate. One thing that you don't want to happen is for Department of Labor to come in and audit and find out that all these people you have listed as 1099s are actually W-2 employees. You're going to have some hefty fines to pay. You're going to have to pay back wages to the employee. You're going to have to pay Social Security and any type of statutory taxes that you were not paying. You got to pay a portion of theirs, and you got to pay all of yours, 100%. So you want to make sure that if you're unsure, you want to have a conversation with someone to clear the air and ensure that you have your staff classified properly. All right, so that's number 3. Number 2, which to me at this point in 2017, it's still really baffling to me why it is that we are grappling so much with the Equal Pay Act, but it's a reality. Women are paid less than men. Everybody knows it. And so as a result of that, we have legislation that has been passed under President Obama in terms of the Lilly Ledbetter Equal Pay Act. This act, I was blown away when I found out how long ago this actually occurred. Lilly Ledbetter worked for Goodyear in the 1970s, I believe it was, some time ago. It was not anytime recent. And before it all was resolved, she was long gone from Goodyear. She had retired, but it all started because in the beginning of her career at Goodyear, she was receiving the same wages as her male counterparts. And somewhere along the line, she fell behind. Even though she was getting outstanding performance evaluations, she was not keeping pace in terms of salary with her male counterparts, and she made an issue about it. And so today we have the Lilly Ledbetter Equal Pay Act. I need employers to really understand that there has to be distinguishing reasons why you're paying one employee something different than you're paying another if they are doing the exact same job. It better be based on education. It better be based on experience, and it better be based on responsibilities that they're actually carrying out during the course of their position. If it's not based on any of those 3 things, it's based on something else. It better be legitimate and documented and documentable and legitimate, or we're going to have some serious issues, and you're going to be contacting an employment attorney to make sure that you don't get in too much trouble in terms of having to correct that mistake. So we want to make sure, again, if you have males and females working in the same exact position, there needs to be a distinguishing reason why the male, if you are doing it, paying them more than you're paying the female. We just need to make sure that that's clear. And like I said, it's 2018 at this point, right? I'm still kind of stuck in 2017, but it's 2018. And this really shouldn't be an issue anymore, but it is. And human resources needs to be brought into the fold in these conversations, all of these conversations from the beginning. In the process of hiring someone, you need to make sure that your human resources either internal manager or person or an external person is reviewing the process to make sure that your hiring processes and your hiring practices are legitimate and that they are following the law. And last but not least, I would not be able to talk about HR law and HR in terms of kind of the news and things that have happened without talking about the infamous and sad, really, but very infamous Me Too movement that occurred. What I found interesting when it broke, that they were going to be on the cover. They were nominated as the Time Person of the Year for 2017, is that Me Too, the hashtag Me Too actually started in 2006. I mean, this is not something that's brand new. But it's been 11 years it's taken for it to get to this point. And it's very unfortunate that so many women, and probably men as well, but so many women have been subject to sexual harassment in the workplace and sexual assault in the workplace. And so having policies and having practices and really honestly having a culture that has a zero tolerance policy to sexual harassment in the workplace is so key at this point. I mean, it should have been that way anyway. But this is something that HR is definitely kept in the dark about. Nobody wants to go to HR to have a conversation about them being sexually harassed, hearing rumors of somebody being sexually harassed. It's just, it's just not something that people want to do. We've got to get under control behavior that is unacceptable in the workplace. And we need to make examples. And I think at this point in our society, given the number of individuals who are prominent, who are in our living rooms on a regular basis through the television, that have been brought up on accusations of sexual harassment, has really been very eye-opening. And I think that companies and employers, it doesn't matter what size you are, small, medium, large, if you've got 2 employees or you've got 200 employees, if you've got 2,000 employees, you need to make sure that your sexual harassment and harassment policies in general, but specifically in regards to sexual harassment, that your policies are sound and they are tight. And then you need to follow those policies. If your policy specifically states that employees are to follow this particular process in terms of filing grievances, then that is the policy that needs to be followed. And HR needs to be at the forefront of that every single time. There is not one reason in the world why human resources would not be aware of a sexual harassment or a harassment claim or accusation in the workplace. There's no excuse for that. And so we have got to make sure we're educating our managers, we're educating our executive leadership, and we're educating our employees on exactly what our policy is, what the culture is that we want to promote in terms of having a harassment-free workplace. So that really is kind of the top 5 big ones from 2017. I think that, moving into 2018, we've got some work to do, certainly around those. But I also want to talk a little bit of fast forward with you, if I can, in terms of what needs to be thought about as we move into 2018 in terms of policy. So certainly we've got some framework to work from 2017. But one of the biggest trends in terms of moving forward in 2018 in human resources is continuous feedback in this multi-generational environment and workforce that we have. It is, in most scenarios, most companies have about 4 to 5 generations at work in the same environment at the same time. And every one of them needs something different. One of the things that has happened, and I actually did several workshops on this in 2017, is we've gotten rid of this annual performance review process. Nobody wants to have a conversation once a year. How effective is that really? People want to know what's going on. We're beyond microwave generation. This one, we are like nanosecond generation, so we can find out anything that we want at the snap of a finger. And so employees are expecting to have that type of conversation and that type of feedback with their managers. They want to know how well they're doing, and they want to know how well they're doing quickly. Is that such a bad thing? No. Is it timely? Possibly. Is it going to take some work to adjust how it is that we get there and what works effectively for different organizations? Absolutely. We need to adapt and adopt a process that's going to work for our internal organization. But does it need to happen? It absolutely needs to happen beyond the shadow of a doubt. Again, we've got multiple generations working side by side with one another. And we're sharing ideas across all types of platforms, technology and digitalization of HR in terms of records and feedback and how we get workforce analytics and data. That's changing, by the month, it seems like. And so we've got to adopt a process that involves human resources. HR does not need to be the last one that knows about what we're doing in terms of how we want to communicate performance with our employees. HR needs to be in the forefront of that conversation to help lead and guide, mainly because HR is going to likely be the department or the individual that's going to have a pulse on what it is that employees are looking for. Number one. Number two, They're going to be able to give the organization information about best practices that need to happen within the organization and how we can kind of manipulate that into what's going to work for our particular culture. And number three, HR needs to be able to evaluate the process and make sure that it is working effectively. So HR does not need to be in the dark in terms of continuous feedback and performance evaluations. We need to be in the front of that conversation, leading that conversation, guiding that conversation, getting the feedback from the employees, but also inserting information and inserting processes that the organization and executive leadership really wants to see happen, and what the results are that leadership is looking for, making sure that the process that's implemented is going to accomplish those results. So that's number one. Number two is all about the employee experience. Let me tell you something. If you don't have an effective employee onboarding process that is engaging, that is technologically savvy, nobody's filling out a whole bunch of paperwork anymore. So if you don't have something that's digital or online, and if you don't have something that makes the employee feel like their decision to come work for your organization was the best decision that they've ever made, you are way, way behind the curve. Employers need to make sure that their employee experience from beginning to end is the most positive experience that they can possibly have for their organization. Employees are savvy. They're doing their homework. They are researching companies. They know what other companies are doing. They know what other companies are paying. And let me tell you, they also are very clear about what it is that they are worth. And so if we want to be in a position to attract the top talent and retain that talent, we as HR professionals and organizations have got to work collectively, not in the dark, not in silos, but we have to work collectively in order to create that employee experience that will be like none other for what it is that we're offering in terms of our organizational culture. We want to attract people that are going to be beneficial to our organization. Everybody is not going to be a fit for our company. Everybody is not going to be a fit for our culture. I remember doing interviews over the last, 18, 19 years, where, we had someone that was, their skill set was impeccable, but in terms of fitting into the organizational culture, we knew from the beginning that it wasn't going to work. That's because we worked very diligently to maintain and to create the workforce culture that we know we needed in order to be competitive with our, competitive in the industry. But we also worked collectively to make sure that we were going to be able to provide these employees with the best work experience that they were going to have as an employee, and that also included not just the onboarding process, but once they became an employee, that also included how do we incorporate rewards and recognition? What do we do to make sure that the employee is engaged on a regular basis? How frequently are we touching them from a performance standpoint? How many times do we talk with them about their performance? How constructive is the feedback, and how much training are we providing to them? All of that is part of the employee experience, and it is one of the biggest things that employees look for. They likely are not leaving one job for another all the time because of money. They're likely leaving because they weren't having a good experience. And so we want to make sure that the employee experience is top notch for our organization, and that we attract and we attempt to retain employees that are going to be good fits for our organization and make our organization shine in terms of the marketplace that we're competing in. And then lastly, transparency. It's a scary word in many aspects, because employers don't want to share information that they think could potentially turn employees off, that they think may cause them to look vulnerable in terms of, to their employees. They're not willing to share. And I can tell you that lack of transparency is as big of a reason why individuals leave as not being a cultural fit. Because employees don't like to have to guess, and they don't want to have to come to work and try to figure out, well, what does this particular memo mean? Well, why did the memo come out at this time versus, waiting until later to come out? I think that being transparent and honest, as much as you possibly can, as an employer, is going to go much, much further than hoarding information and keeping information that employees, I can tell you, already know. Okay, now they may not know the specific details of everything, but they most certainly do know what it is that's going on in the organization to some degree. And they're coming up with their own assessments and they're making their own decisions. And that's not really what we want. We want employees to be well informed. So if they decide to leave or they decide to make a decision to continue to work diligently or not work diligently, we want them to make that decision based on real information. And so HR needs to be side by side with executive leadership and executive management in terms of how we craft transparent messaging to the employees. It's part of the employee experience, which we just talked about. Knowing that bonuses may not be happening this year because the company didn't do well. That's probably not the easiest conversation to have, but not having the conversation and having December roll around, which is typically the time that this particular company may give them, and they don't give them and they don't say anything about not giving them, that doesn't bode well at all. So we need to, and that's just by way of example, but we need to make sure that our employees are having the best experience, and part of engaging with them and part of having that awesome employee experience really comes down to being transparent. So those are the top 3 trends for 2018. We need to tighten up our policies around not only those trends, but also the laws that come into effect when we start talking about implementing these new policies and these new processes, and being available to employees and dominating that employee experience within that organizational culture. I just want to thank you guys for joining this inaugural episode. I'm really excited to be sharing this information with you all. Information about how to access the podcast going forward will be forthcoming. We are looking to, it will definitely be on YouTube. It will also be on the website, which is www.HR4you.com. And we also will be uploading the podcast. You can access it through SoundCloud as well. In addition to monthly podcasts that are going to air the first Wednesdays of every month at 9:00 p.m., we have a bi-monthly digital HR resource that is specifically geared towards small businesses that will be distributed via email to anyone that wants to get access to it. It'll be a bi-monthly. It'll be available in January, and that will be a January-February episode. So every 2 months, you can expect to receive some information via the digital HR resource. It's called HR Pro Connection. So if you're looking to get access to that, certainly send an email to Embrace HR, that's EMBRACE, the letters HR, at HR4you.com. Send an email there, and I can definitely get you added to the mailing list and get you information about that. If you are interested in hearing particular topics or have questions or comments about the podcast, I also encourage you to contact me, same email address at embracehr@hrproforyou.com. Please make sure you send your questions or comments. We would love your feedback. We want this to be an engaging time that you spend. I know it's a 20, 30-minute podcast, and we want that time to be effective and give information that you're looking to get. So certainly make sure that you send information or questions to us if there are topics that you're interested in hearing. The next episode will air February the 7th, which is the first Wednesday in February at 9:00 p.m. Right here. So you can certainly, again, gain access to that through YouTube, the website, and also will be uploaded on SoundCloud. And we're going to be talking about office romances. Hey, no, just kidding. So we're going to be talking about it from a standpoint of why office romances are often kept in the dark in terms of HR. Why would that possibly be? And what kind of policies do you need to have in place as it relates to office fraternization, as we'll call it, the HR political term. So again, office romances will be talked about February the 7th, 2018, 9:00 p.m. I am so thankful that you joined me here today. And again, please reach out to us with questions or comments or particular topics that you would like to hear discussed here on HR in the Dark. I thank you for joining us and hope you have a great evening and a very productive month in January.